This isn't on. Hello? Okay, everybody, I want to welcome you back, whether you're here in the sanctuary or at home. We're going to have our afternoon session, which will end at 1:30. There'll be a 10-minute break, and then breakout sessions, whether here or on Zoom, will start at 1:40. Those will end at 2:30, and we'll be back here in the sanctuary at 2:40 for our closing and communion. There were some problems for the groups at home with their Zoom small groups. Hopefully everybody got on and everything's okay. If you have any problems this afternoon, I'm going to give you Heather's phone number so you can call and we'll make sure we get you on. She told me I could do that. And that's 319-321-2848. So for the at-home people, if you aren't able to get on, hopefully everything will go smoothly this afternoon. So we are now ready to continue on, and we'll get Mary Jane start us with music.
Good afternoon, everybody. Well, I'm going to bore you a little bit more, but most of you said that you weren't too bored this morning. But two people asked about something that I should have explained, and so I want to explain right now, is that when the a hymn usually has a hymn text writer and then the tune, the composer, and most of the time those two people aren't the same. And so today I'm focusing on the hymn text writers that were all female today, but every single hymn for the most part, has a different composer. And a lot of times, too, if you were ever wondering, if you open up your hymnal, and you just pull out doesn't really matter. I don't know, let's just find one we all know. My faith looks up to thee, 426. And, if you look on the bottom, you see the words, and then that's the text writer, and then the music. Then you see under here, you see a all capital word, and it says Olivet, and then there's some numbers behind it. How many of you, do anybody know what that means? No. Maybe a few musicians do. Okay, so this is the metrical rhyme meter of the hymn, okay? So, my faith looks up to thee, thou Lamb of Calvary, Savior divine. So it's like 6, 6, 4.
And that goes with how you would say
and that's how you would say the poem. And so, long time ago, it became standard that you could then compose a hymn tune based on that metrical meter of how the words and the poetry. So you can actually mix and match your hymn tunes. So maybe sometimes you found like a hymn and you're like, well, I know these words, but this is not the tune that I know, right? Or I know this tune, but these are different words. And so that's what we do with hymns. And did I explain that well? Did everybody get that? Okay, good. The coolest thing, as a church musician is that, you can be real creative if you want to, you can, but usually it gets people confused when you can't see the same words and the text. So usually we use, what's published in a hymnal. But there's a lot that goes into working on and publishing a hymnal. I knew someone that was working on the Presbyterian hymnal, and it was a 10-year process to kind of figure out how to include songs from our past, songs from our current day, and then, songs that might challenge us, theologically and spiritually. And so each hymnal, kind of has its own mission, in a way. So that being said, what else I wanted to tell you is that, so during the pandemic, at the beginning of the pandemic, once a week, I did an episode. And so if you really like this stuff, you can go on YouTube and Google my name, and on my web and on my YouTube channel, you can scroll down, and if you want to start with the first one, it's Blessed Assurance, so you've heard it all, so you could skip over it. but I have about, I don't know, 17 or 18 that I did, and specifically I was addressing the congregation at First United Methodist Church, and it was contextually in time, so you can just, appreciate that as history. But then you can just forward on, and you can see some of that. And when I did that, then I just picked one specific hymn, and then I explained the history of the text writer, and then I explained the history of the composer and where the tune came from, and then I sang it so that everyone would sing with me. So that's what I kind of skipped over this morning in talking about, is how did the music come about. And so that leads me to our next text writer, Eleanor Fargen, who is British, and she was born in 1881 and to 1965, so she had a nice life. Again, she could see, but her eyesight was poor, and again, she was a little bit of a sickly child, So I think that sometimes this really bodes creativity when you are stuck inside. I know my aunt, she had terrible asthma when she was young, and unlike today, there was no advent of inhalers, so she just always stayed inside and played the piano and sang all the time. Anyway, sidebar. Eleanor Fargen was actually, she was a famous English author. And sometimes she even wrote with a pseudonym, which probably helped her fame, because, as you know, it was very, very difficult for women to have a career, obviously. When she was growing up, she had a very artistic home, and her dad was a writer, and her mother was a daughter of an American actor. So they really, she had two brothers, and so they loved arts, and it was a very creative home, but because she was a sickly child, she actually schooled at home. So I think that's probably an advantage to her, because she really got a better education at home. And her brother, and they tell about how her and her brother would have this creative game where they would take on characters and literature and everything and come up with all kinds of pretend stories. And I mean, so you can imagine the creativity that brought on. And he's also a published writer. And I even read that they did that into their 20s. This so this incredible imaginary pretend world of creativity. So she's most known, if she had been a male, maybe she wouldn't be most known for children's stories, but that's what she did a lot of, and some of her most famous works were Martin Pippin and the School Orchard, I think, and so just great pieces of literature. There is a quote from, Martin Pippin in the Apple Orchard, there it is. And there's a wonderful quote, sometimes when you Google, it'll come up with A to Z quotes or something. So this is just a little snippet of her writing from this famous book. And he loved her, both for her fault and her redemption of it, more than he had ever thought he could love her, for he had believed that in their kiss love had reached its uttermost. But love has no uttermost, as the stars have no number and the sea no rest. Wow. So, she just must have been an incredible woman. And so she won the Carnegie Medal for Children's Stories, and she was actually the very first Hans Christian Andersen Medal winner. And you can, a lot of her works are published and all this. I didn't run across her pseudonym, or if I did, I forgot to write it down. So I'd have to look that up. Let's see. Okay, so the song, the hymn that we all know and love, that she's most famous for, is "Morning Has Broken." Yeah, And we all know that not because of her, actually, but because of Cat Stevens. Now, Cat Stevens, maybe you all remember, but sang this song, and it became #1 in easy listening and #6 in a Hot 100. So this Cat Stevens, it was a popular song, and I put this in my video, but I just find it interesting that, you know, this song, the text was already published in a book by Eleanor in 1931, and it was set in a children's hymn book to an old Gaelic tune. So this tune was not by composers; it was a folk tune, and you find, I've found a few of the female hymn writers, their hymns were in, you know, hymns for children or hymns for youth or whatever. So especially hers, and there's one other one, People Look East, that we're going to sing, that were both found in like children's hymnals. But because Cat Davis made it famous, and now we all sing it, oh, and I know what else I was going to say, is that the composer that kind of made the piano arrangement that made Cat Stevens famous, if you go and listen to that song, it's just him singing with this great vibrant piano part. And I think he paid him like $10 or maybe $100 to write this arrangement and have full rights for it. So that poor composer. And then Eleanor was the one that wrote really this whole, so you know, Cat Stevens just riding on the backs of women and other people. Anyway, okay, so that's all to say that I think we should sing "Morning Has Broken," and it's on the sheet. Yes. So these two, "Morning Has Broken" is on the bottom of this. And I'm gonna pull out. Singing that song in church. Yeah, and the other thing I enjoyed finding out about that is that it was actually the original title was Morning, I didn't write it down. It's like Morning for a Spring Morning. It had, the spring was in the title, which I thought that was lovely to find out because I always identify this, you know. I mean, it is spring, And the other thing that I think is lovely about this is that it has that real element of wonder, right? That the beautiful, like, inspiring wonder. And you know, and then you think about her life, how she was just born into this, you know, bed of artistic creativity, and how she had a wonderful childhood, that she kept that real sense of wonder, and it's just absolutely apparent in this hymn. And so another hymn, so that was published in Children's Bells. I did write it down. And then another one that was published in a People Look East. It was also published in a children's hymnal, and I'm so glad that it got resurrected. And it's not as well known, but when I discovered it, when I first started my church work, I am a PK, and my dad's Presbyterian minister, and it was a small church, so my dad always picked out the hymns, and we had the old red hymnal, and eventually we got the blue one. So my childhood hymnody was based on my dad's favorite hymns. So, but because this People Look East wasn't in the original red hymnal, then I didn't grow up singing it in my church. I don't know, how many of you, how many of you know this, People Look East? It appears in the old blue hymnal, Presbyterian hymnal, and it's in our new hymnal, in the new Presbyterian hymnal as well. And I love it, again, because it's Advent carols are usually like dull, and not dull, but like in minor key and very, dark and depressing. And when are you more excited than during Advent, right? I mean, I always think, I like to think about Advent. I like to think about when I was pregnant, and like how, especially with my first kid, I was just like obsessed with like, oh my gosh, like how big is he, and all this and all that, and so there was no mournfulness. I was so excited. So again, we look at People Look East, and I think it's great because if you're really noticing musicians, here we have again a 6/8 meter, which just means it's like in triples. So it's bum 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 ba da, like the other one. So it has it's got a lot of upward joy and beat. So let's sing this one and enjoy the joyfulness of Advent. I'll try. People look east, the time is here, of the crowning of the year. Make your house fair as you are able, trim the hall and set a table. People look east and sing today, while the guest is on the way. Farewell's imagination, her creativity, and she loved nature. That's the other thing I forgot to say. She just loved nature, and you can just tell in all of her hymns. So that's Eleanor Fargen. And last we come to a hymn, author of a hymn text that we all know and love, and that is His Eyes on the Sparrow. And so Avila Martin, she wrote the hymn text to His Eyes on the Sparrow. She, I think unlike the others, not that she wasn't brilliant, but there's also just not a lot of history on Avila. She was born in Nova Scotia, and she died in Atlanta, Georgia, and she was married, but the history doesn't, her first marriage is, they don't have record of it. And then she married a preacher, and so her husband was a preacher and also a musician and a composer. So that led them to write lots of hymns together. He took sick some, and so they weren't able, they traveled around, but in general, that's what she did. There's not as much history on Avila. But we do know that His Eyes on a Sparrow, she wrote the text for that, and then he tried writing the tune for it, and they didn't like it. They didn't like the tune, so they sent it off to, where's his name? Hold on. Charles Gabriel. And he's a famous composer of gospel songs who wrote a tune for it. Now, the fun part about Charles Gabriel is that, guess what? He grew up in Wilton, Iowa. Muscatine, like right down the road. And so I didn't write a lot of his history down, but you can go to the video and I say a little bit more about him. But just needless to say, he was an incredibly cool guy, and was at First Presbyterian Church and could just write a hymn and have it ready for Sunday on the text that the preacher was going to preach on. So yeah, so he was a really neat guy. So that's cool that there's a Presbyterian and very close Iowa connection to this hymn. And then, of course, this incredible text, His Eyes on the Sparrow, we can, if you want to pull it out, thank you, 441. Obviously, it's an incredible, first of all, I love that the text was written by a woman because it's about the oppressed, and so, African American community during the Civil Rights Movement just really grabbed onto this text because it is just absolutely appropriate, and he knows He washes me, I'll sing and I'm free, So there's one other person that's connected to the story of this hymn that I'd like to tell you about. I didn't get a picture up, but Ethel Waters, if you want to write down, she's an incredible person that I'm sure you would love to Google. So Ethel Waters, like in the water. And Ethel was a famous actress, African-American actress in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, I think maybe just 30s. And her story is incredible. So she wrote an autobiography and titled it His Eyes on the Sparrow. Well, her whole life began with trauma because she was actually the child of a rape. And if you can imagine being an African-American woman, I can't. I can't imagine, especially in the early part of the century, in the 30s and 40s, and being in the entertainment industry, how much abuse and such she must have endured. I think that I have not read her autobiography, but I think it's very, very interesting. And when you Google it, there's this beautiful video from a movie from about 1950, and it's a scene where in a movie. She's of course the mammy, the nanny, for two little white kids, and they're in this tense situation. They're really scared, and there's this beautiful scene where she pulls them to her breast and sings "His Eyes on Sparrow," and it's just a cappella, and it's just, go Google it. It's so good. I'm sorry I didn't play it for you. Then she then tells of having a big conversion experience and coming to Christ, and guess who latched on to her? Billy Graham. And so then she kind of, I guess she became kind of like a poster child. I don't know. She went with Billy Graham to all these huge camp meeting things, and she'd sing "His Eyes on Sparrow," and she'd give a testimony. And so again, this is a great person to Google, because then you can watch her present in one of these with Billy Graham and hear her sing. And
Her name again?
Ethel Waters. Ethel Waters. And to me, the most profound performing singers are the ones that you can just tell that there's no ego involved, and it's just the soul singing through. And Ethel Waters, she just sings with her soul. And so she's wonderful. All right, so let's all sing with our souls and sing this song. All right, 4-4-1. Yeah, let's stand up. This is one you just let it rip, everyone. There's no. Oops, I'm gonna keep that open. Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Welcome back. Hope in the now. We spent our first session today talking about hope in the here, in a particular place and location, finding hope where you are planted. I'd like to turn our attention to a slightly different direction now. For our next time together, let us consider hope in the now. As the Holy Spirit works in and through creation since the very first Big Bang, hope always unfolds in history. That is to say, at a particular moment in time, marked by whatever calendar you use. I will share with you some reflections I have of hope revealing her lovely face at specific moments in the past, and then will bring us into present time. We have looked at where we are. What about when we are? We are in the now, seeking hope. Not every woman wants to be a mother. Not every woman needs to be a mother. Indeed, I am meeting more and more couples who are choosing not to be parents, and I applaud and respect this decision. They say to me things like, "This is not a good time to bring children into the world." It's hard to argue with that. However, I have 3 children already in the world, so here I am. This is my reality. This is my now. I never wanted children. My mother left our family when we were little, when my last brother was born. And I always feared that I would either be a terrible, violent mother like she was, or worse, decide one day to pack it all up and leave. And then I met my little niece when she was born. She was fascinating as a baby, more so as a toddler. I left myself open to the possibility of motherhood, but I also was not actively pursuing it. I married and left the question of motherhood somewhat open-ended. On February 1st, 2003, I was catering a dear friend's ordination at Wartburg Seminary in Dubuque. We turned on live footage of the Space Shuttle Columbia in the background, as many interested guests requested it. As I scurried about, refilling trays and glasses, I felt a terrible cramping in my lower abdomen. I excused myself to the restroom, where I spent the next half hour bleeding and cramping and crying. I returned to the reception to discover the Space Shuttle Columbia had just disintegrated as it re-entered the atmosphere, killing all 7 crew members. I lost a child that day, a child I did not even know had been conceived. 7 astronauts lost their lives that day. While I kept my personal pain to myself, which women are excellent at doing, the reception grew quiet. Finally, it was reduced to a room full of people silently hugging each other. What else could you do? I learned 2 things that day. 1, my miscarriage revealed to me an unexpected and fierce hope to one day become a mother. And 2, a realization that sometimes hope is silent. Sometimes, honestly, there are no words. These 2 events occurring on the same day in history revealed to me that hope is far stronger than I ever suspected, that it yearns for life, claws at it even in the face of death. and that human vocabulary is often depleted when attempting to articulate loss, mixed with the desperate hope that tomorrow one might find the strength to simply put one foot in front of the other, which is sometimes what hope looks like in the now, wordlessly putting one foot in front of another at this moment. Perhaps another day will be a day for poetry and dancing, but not this day, not now. That day was a hope for survival. I went on to conceive and birth 3 healthy baby boys. For me, life changed the moment they drew their first breath, the moment they first cried, the moment they first blinked their eyes open. In those days, time and hope were marked exclusively by the now. It was marked for me by the first words uttered, first steps taken, the first earache, the first tooth cut, the first tooth lost, the first bruise, the first blood shed. It was this floor for the first step, that church parking lot for the first bike crash. For me, motherhood, especially early motherhood, perhaps all early motherhood, is defined by the now, because mothers rarely have energy for the next. I distinctly remember lifting Philip up on my shoulders in the second autumn of his life. He was hoisted into tree branches on our parsonage lawn, laden with crisp orange and brown leaves, and his tiny hands crinkled and crushed them. He had bright red little knit gloves on. We inhaled that smell of damp leaves in the fall. You know that smell. And I precisely remember begging him, remember this moment. Remember it. I remember Jacob falling asleep in the snow after I searched frantically for him for 15 minutes. He was 5, and he had built a fort in the snow along with the neighbor boys. They had left. And as I looked out the kitchen window into the backyard, I saw no activity, only a golden sun hanging low in the afternoon sky. Panicked, I ran outside to look for Jake. I turned to see him tucked into a corner of their snow fort, swaddled by his snow pants, gloves, scarf, coat, and face mask, fast asleep. I gently shook him awake. When he opened his eyes, I remember how his eyelashes looked, with snowflakes clinging to them like little diamonds on his red lashes. Remember this moment, I said to him. I remember saying it. Remember this. When Christian was 5 months old, I carried him outside into our backyard where I spread a blanket on the ground and laid him on his back. It was a warm and windy November day. The gusts made him catch his breath as he waved his arms around in the air like babies do. A crow perched on the clothesline above him, and he was captivated. It squawked and it strutted, and he was utterly spellbound by this display. The crow gave quite a performance that day. Remember this moment. I remember saying to him, and my voice was carried away by the wind, remember this. I don't know if any of these moments actually found a permanent place in the boy's memory. I do know, however, that they are forever in mine, living as snapshots of majestic culture and nature and these 3 curious little lives entrusted to my care. And the feeling that washed over me again and again like ocean waves was hope. Hope in that moment and those fleeting glimpses in time. Hope that I might be a better mother than my own. Hope that they might become good men in the world. Hope that their eyes would always open to fleeting glimpses of unspeakable beauty in the world. For me, those young and early years of their lives were punctuated by countless moments of hope in the now, in that rocking chair at 3:30 in the morning when the whole world sleeps and I feed you and look out the window. I remember after Jake was born and I returned to work, I was serving 2 congregations in rural small town at the time. I had a joint church council member meeting one night, which consisted of 18 men. I'm gonna let you think about that for a second. 18 men, 9 from each congregation, and myself. I had recently moved to 3/4 time at church, so as to also be a mother. The council president said to me, "I can't help but wonder, Pastor Sarah, if you love your kids more than the church, because it's starting to look that way." To which I replied, 100% I love my kids more than this or any church. Did not win me popularity points, but it gave me hope in myself in the now, in that place, in that church, hope in the reality that words would come to me when they needed to come, which would serve me well, if not uncomfortably, in the approaching years. That council moment as a mother gave me hope in the now. The boys are older now. They are 15, 16, 17. And although those fleeting glimpses have changed somewhat, I have not stopped being captivated by them. Rather than snugly adorable little boys in the snow or lifted into the leaves or laid on a blanket in the sun, they are men children now, with broad shoulders and facial hair and opinions. For me, hope stirs in my heart in the now. Every time they blow through the house between school and football or cross country or hockey practice and quickly recap their day, and then they are gone again, like spotting a unicorn leaping into a forest or a centaur before it disappears behind a tree. I feel hope for their health every time they devour every edible thing within their path, like locusts. Hope every time they bring home a friend or girlfriend or a math problem or a sadness. Hope that maybe I've made a difference in their lives. Hope that they are compassionate and observant and bright and dedicated humans. Hope that they discover a purpose in life. For me, motherhood has taught me everything that I know about hope in the now. When they were little, it was enough to bathe and feed and clothe and instruct and try to keep the 3 of them from always wrestling in a dog pile. It was enough. That was enough for the day, for the now. At the end of these days, as they and I grow older, I often find myself returning to that feeling like a comfortable cocoon of being content with finding hope in the now. Knowing for the now, they are healthy and alive. Sometimes that's all one can do. A biblical example of finding hope in the now. This church, all Christian churches, are coming out of the Christmas and Epiphany seasons. Some of my neighbors still have their Christmas decorations up. Drives me crazy. While I understand the hesitation and taking them down, it's time. It's high time. I've always struggled with the Christmas narrative I preach every Christmas day. I struggle with Mary in particular and her role. I innately resist and despise the submissive and meek language surrounding her role in the incarnation. It is deeply problematic and a very disturbing narrative, if you think about it, to celebrate a young virgin being overcome by God the Father who impregnates her. If one were to listen solely to the church's interpretation of the birth narrative of Jesus, one must draw the conclusion that Mary is in fact raped by a male-engendered God who overpowers her in her youth and her innocence? Is that what we celebrate at Christmas? I think not. I was talking with Christian several weeks back about this, and I realized 2 things that are very important and deeply relevant to our conversation today. Firstly, in following with the point made earlier that if the Holy Spirit is indeed a female-engendered person of the triune God, perhaps Mary is less submissively overpowered by a solely male God and more invited into the mystery of the incarnation by God who is both male and female mother and father. It changes it, doesn't it? Secondly, it occurred to me that of all the language that traditionally surrounds Mary, meek, mild, submissive, it is entirely created by the church. That's not scriptural. Scripture does not describe Mary in this way. The church does, which feeds into the traditional male church hierarchy, keeping Mary and women submissive. And it also supports an extremely problematic purity culture, which esteems and elevates women only when they are chaste and pure and untouched by man. In reality, in the biblical narrative, Mary digs deep to find hope in the now when confronted by a terrifying angel Gabriel, traditionally described as having eyes of flame armed with a spear in his right hand. In a display of biblical badassery, Mary actually engages this terrifying angel. Ironically, and funnily enough, by the way, Zechariah also engages Gabriel only 16 verses earlier, but Gabriel is not impressed, loses patience with him, and strikes him mute for a very long time. I find that funny. Maybe because Zechariah demands to know when Gabriel's prophecy is to take place. He wants to understand this with his head. How will I know when these things take place, he asks. Whereas Mary embraces the reality with her heart, where her hope lives, and she simply asks, how can this be? Which I think is fair. I think she deserves that. But then Mary goes on to make a declaration rooted deeply in hope. Here I am, the servant of the Lord. Let it be to me according to your word. Okay. So this is voice. And this is agency. This is consent. This is Mary understanding her situation in the now will not be good. As an unwed mother, but one who is quite literally armed with nothing but hope. And as she learns and comprehends what the scriptures mean for her son and for her as his mother, Mary can only hold on to the now because the prophets do not offer much consolation for the future regarding her son. Yes, she is to birth the Son of God, but she is also to watch him die. For her to look beyond the now, into the Garden of Gethsemane, into Pilate's headquarters, into Golgotha, is impossible. Instead, for the now, Mary considers her role in it all, and she says to Gabriel, I'm in. From then on, she trusts the Holy Spirit to lead her, to guide her, who gives her the hope she needs day to day in order to be a mother to the Son of God. The Catholics, I think, get it. I don't say that often. The Catholics get it in their elevation of Mary. I like that. She deserves that. But they miss the gritty understanding of her role and her voice and her fierce hope that she is savvy, not naive. She is strong, not submissive. She is willing. She is not overcome. That she is not simply impregnated by a father figure, but invited into relationship with all of the persons of the triune God, including mothering Holy Spirit. Moving into the Middle Ages, a little history today. We encounter many mystical women who relied on the same Holy Spirit to stir hope in them in the now. Women who made their voices known in dangerous times. Women like Joan of Arc, right? Martyred at the age of 19 in 1431 after being captured in war and tried for heresy. She believed that God had chosen her to lead France to victory in its ongoing war with England and convinced the king to let her lead the French army to Orleans, where it defeated the English army. These are women like Hildegard von Bingen, a Benedictine abbess who lived in the 11th century. She had visions. She recorded them in a book called know the ways. She went on to write philosophy, as well as works on medicine, natural history, music, and more. Bishops and kings sought her counsel at a time when very few women were allowed to engage the political domain. These are women like 16th century Saint Teresa of Avila, who sought to join a convent but was forbidden by her father. She went on to write an autobiography, and she joined a convent. Her works on endurance and hope have been read for centuries. These women, and so many more, relied on the Holy Spirit to lead them and guide them, to stir up hope within them, not only for themselves, but for other women and for the future of the church. Their courage and their strength gave them the hope they needed to endure opposition, persecution, and in many cases helped them face their own deaths. For them, their hope was rooted in the now, because there was no guaranteed next. A big leap in history to 2009, when the ELCA, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, which I am affiliated with and ordained into, passed legislation at its annual church-wide assembly allowing clergy to perform same-gender marriages and also allowing for openly gay clergy to retain their status on the roster of ordained ministry. By this time, I had been serving the same two congregations in a small town in eastern Iowa for 8 years. Our congregations had done our work, I thought. We had done our Bible studies on this issue of social justice. I thought we were in a good place for this new policy to be accepted by our congregations. However, in 2012, our organist became engaged to his longtime partner of 13 years. They asked me to perform their marriage, and I, of course, said yes. What do you think happened? The town and the congregations exploded. People left the church. I had death threats made against me. My young sons lost almost all their friends. Overnight, I went from being beloved to villain. I remember driving my sons to their dads the day of the wedding, honestly wondering if I would ever see them again. Would I be shot during the service? After all of the farmers in the area were armed. As I turned towards the back of the altar of the church to prepare for communion during the wedding, I remember looking into the brass cross, using it as a mirror so as to see if anyone was approaching me from behind. Chad and Jason were wed one lovely Saturday afternoon in October of 2013, and nothing bad happened. The ceremony was beautiful. My colleague, who assisted with communion that day, turned to me at the end of the service and triumphantly said, "I can't help but think this moment will change your ministry forever." He was right, but not in the way that he had intended. He could not have known what I knew. I knew that I was going to have to leave and uproot my sons. I knew that this event would scar me forever, but I knew at that moment in the now that it was worth it. And there was hope. I felt hope that the Spirit was leading me to preach a grace that is for all people, not for some. I felt hope in that moment, finding my voice as a woman, as a mother, and as a preacher. But even as painful and scary as it was, there was hope, knowing I would do it all over again. As I looked in the brass cross on the altar, I felt hope that if the worst were to happen to me during the wedding, that my sons would know that I stood for something, that justice means something. I tried to do my part in the world and in the church. About 2 years before all that happened, to give an indication of my mental framework at the time, I entered the darkest period of my life in regards to mental and emotional health. I was in the middle of a divorce. I felt ashamed. I felt hopeless, like I was destroying my kids' lives. I wondered if the damage I was inflicting on them was the same that my mother had inflicted on me. The thought was unbearable. One night, after putting the boys to bed, I ran the bath. They were, at this time, 4, 5, and 6. I remember soaking and sobbing, feeling overcome by only blackness and despair. I thought of ending my life. I thought about it as I soaked. I played it through in my head even, as you do, step by step. A few times even, I started to get out of the bath to set the course in motion and then sank back into the water, and here's what stopped me. I knew that Christian would be the first to wake up, because he always is, and he would find me. The thought of this was incomprehensible. And so, the clock ticked, minute by minute, second by second, the now into the next now, and I did nothing. And went to bed, and woke up the next day. Sometimes, hope in the now means hitching yourself to someone else to pull you through when you cannot pull yourself through. Sometimes love for another can drag you through times when you lack love for yourself. I can tell you with certainty, after seeing the consequences of some devastating decisions and working with young adults for 8 years now, that such times of feeling hopeless always pass. It is not that there is a lack of hope at such times. Hope is there. Maybe you just can't see it, feel it, hear it, sense it, but hope is there. And it is that thing or that person that drags you out of bed. It is that thing that needs you, that thing that depends on you, that thing or that person that saves your life. And maybe they don't even know it, so that you might live to see another day. I don't care if it's a pet or a child or a friend. We're all really in this together, not to sound so cliche, but hope in the now is best felt in community, which is why I think this retreat is so special. In community, for example, perhaps I am able to see hope when you do not. Perhaps you are able to see hope when I cannot. And in this way, we carry the other through, especially now, perhaps more than ever, if you are at all inclined to listen to the Spirit whispering into your heart's words of love and hope. Do not keep this to yourselves, I beg you. Instead, let hope stir within you such boldness, such courage, that you are not afraid to tell one another of the gifts you see in them, of the value they bring to the world, of how grateful you are to have them in your life. Hope in the now is extraordinarily urgent. It is driven by the heart, which is filled with hope, spoken by the Spirit, passed on from you to another human being. Your hope in the now, your next breath, your next word, your next step might be life-changing or life-saving for someone else. However weak or small you feel your hope is, certainly you have enough to share. There are times when I despair too. I've shared some of these times with you. There's plenty of these times. But sometimes, often even, I am so grateful for hope in the now. For the times when the boys' friends are over for breakfast and I kind of recede into the background and I watch them and I hear them. They are ridiculous, they are moronic, they are irreverent, they are vulgar. They are also kind and compassionate and hilarious and beautiful, thoughtful and interesting. They fill me with a hope I can neither describe nor contain, that as desperately as I want time to freeze, for them to remain in my here and now forever, I know that these young men will soon catapult into the world. They remind me that hope is discovered in the here of my kitchen and in the now of a Tuesday morning. Perhaps one day they might remember these mornings with eggs and pancakes in our kitchen. Maybe they will have some faint memory of me whispering from the stove, remember this place, this time. Remember this. Here ends our second session.
Sarah, thank you so much for sharing your story, for sharing your heart with us today. Thank you. We are going to take a brief break now, maybe about 5 minutes, and then we will gather in our small groups. So if you're here in the building, that means you will be in the same room you were in this morning. And if you are at home, give us a couple minutes to get everything in order, and then you can link to your Zoom room. All right, thanks everybody. We will gather together again at 2:40 for our closing, and that's when we'll do communion. So if you're at home, gather your communion elements, and if you're here, we'll give you directions later. All right, thank you.